So to go along with this theme of, how we can put these monomers together, what we're going to be talking about first is really, really simple disaccharide formation. So as I said before, disaccharides are basically two monomers of sugar that are linked together, right? And again, how you link them together is through a process called dehydration synthesis. They're calling it a dehydration reaction here, but basically the same thing. So you have two glucose molecules. You have that OH and H, which is part of the hydroxyl groups that are sticking off. Don't worry about the chemistry here, but what you need to know is that OH and H can link together to form a very stable compound, which obviously is water, okay? That water is kicked out, which is why we call this dehydration synthesis, and now we've stuck two glucose molecules and bonded them together. That makes maltose. So if you've ever had Whoppers, that candy, usually around Easter for us anyway, or malted, like a malt, like a chocolate malt, like a milkshake, that's maltose that you're tasting. So it's a little bit different as far as how it's put together, which is why it has that different taste to it. Remember, shape dictates function, right, in molecules. So that's why you detect it as a different flavor. You can also stick glucose and fructose together, same process, dehydration synthesis, and that's sucrose. So sucrose is the sugar you put in your coffee, that you bake with, the white crystalline stuff that you buy at the store. So, pardon me, those are two disaccharides that came from monomers, right? So glucose is a monomer, fructose is a monomer, and you can get two different ones, disaccharides from those two monomers. So what we're going to do then is just talk about now polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, or the polymers of sugar, so these are multiple subunits, right? Like these beads on a string here, uh, have storage and structural roles. So most of the time, polysaccharides are either to store energy or to form the structure of an organism, right? So in other words, part of the body. So the structure and function of a polysaccharide are determined by the monomers themselves, right? Glucose versus fructose versus something else, right? And the positions of, don't worry about this term, glycosidic linkages, the positions of the bonds formed in between them. We'll just call it that. Okay, I think it's much easier to understand that way. So, a big bowl of rice, all of this that you're seeing here, most of it anyway, are linked together sugars, right? So that's why we say rice is relatively starchy. Big bowl of noodles, same thing. I know you're looking at this and like, ew, why is that? Yeah, no, that's actually, people do eat insects in lots of other countries. And what makes up insect exoskeletons, like that hard part, when you step on a bug, you hear the crunch, right? That is also a polymer of sugar, believe it or not, called chitin. And we'll be talking about that as we go. So, um, starch is a storage polysaccharide, right? So multiple glucoses all stuck together of plants. And it's all glucose monomers. So, each one of these in this little picture down here, I know this is a little bit more detailed than I can draw. Each one of these little hexagons here is a glucose molecule. So you can see how many we have actually stuck together here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It seems like there's about 3 per turn here, and it just keeps on going. So these are really, really big molecules that store energy for plants. Now, I don't want to, sort of go past the point because this is a very basic, sort of chemistry and biology question from high school. But where does the energy come from? So I just want to make sure that we hit this because I haven't actually said it, myself in this presentation. When you break bonds, so you see all those bonds over there that are sticking all of these little glucose subunits together, right? All these monomers together, that always releases energy, right? Now, that would be, what we would call hydrolysis, right? So you're breaking bonds by using water. That would be releasing energy, right? When you form bonds, in order to actually stick these molecules together, you need energy, okay? So that's, remember, called, I got to write out the whole thing, dehydration synthesis, okay? So I think that's really important, and I kind of figured that might, already be in people's heads, but this is extremely important. So if you think about Let's talk about forming bonds first, actually, right? So we haven't talked about this in detail yet, but how do plants grow, right? I mean, if you have a plant, you put it in some soil, you give it some water, right? And you stick it out where it can get some sunlight or artificial light. The light that comes from the sun provides the energy to form these bonds. So really what plants do is they convert solar energy, solar radiation, into chemical bonds that they can use to link sugars together and actually to make sugar itself, right? That's called photosynthesis. Okay, so that's great. What happens when we say, as humans, eat this starch? Potatoes are full of starch, rice is full of starch, wheat is full of starch, right? When we eat this starch, we use hydrolysis with our own enzymes in our own body to break those bonds. And by breaking the bonds that the plant made in the plant products, we release that energy into a form that we can actually use to run our own cells, right? So this is one big circle of life, if you want to call it that, right? So we'll talk much more about this later when we talk about, cell energetics and energy processing. But I think it's important for you to know at this point that this is why these molecules are so really great at storing energy. Look at all those bonds there that can be broken and have energy release, right? So I just didn't want that fact to, go by the wayside. And I didn't want to assume that maybe whether you had or had not had it before. So I think this is a really important point, that you should keep in your head for the remainder of the semester, really. All right, so glycogen is a little bit different shape. So you can see there's a little bit of difference as far as how the chains are going here. Same thing, you still have glucose, right? All these little green hexagons. But how animals store starch, or how animals store sugars, really, they have a different form of starch, right? You, me, other animals store starch in their livers and in their muscle tissue primarily, right? So think about it, if you played sports in high school or if you're playing sports now, and say you're doing something that's going to require a lot of physical activity over a long period of time, soccer match, cross country running, something like that, right? Um, what do you do the night before? Your team gets together when we could get together when it wasn't coronavirus time, and you would have a pasta party. In other words, you would carb up the night before, right? So what's that going to do? You eat all those monomers, right, or all those starches and sugars, right? They go into your system, and your body stores them in this form. It takes all those sugars and relinks them together into a form of energy called glycogen, right? So when you are running down the soccer field or running cross country or, doing whatever you're doing, playing basketball, football, something like that, right? These little bonds can break relatively easily and give you energy, right? So that's why you carb up, or have a pasta party the night before some, really important game where everybody's really going to need to give it their all right? So, uh, polysaccharides can obviously store energy, but they can also form structures. Okay, so if you're sitting at a with a on a wooden chair or at a wooden desk or something like that, or you have any wood in your house that you can see right now, that is obviously made by plants, right? By trees. The structure of wood is largely carbohydrate. So really, you're sitting on a bunch of sugars, or you're leaning on at your desk a bunch of sugars if you're leaning on a wood desk. So by putting those sugars together in a particular way, that means a lot as far as how that resulting polymer will behave and what it'll do. So still we're talking about glucose, right? So there's glucose and here's glucose. Now remember how we talked about isomers? You can have the same structure but different or sorry, same formula rather, but different structure of a molecule. Well, this is called alpha glucose, right? Or A glucose. This is called B or beta glucose. Can you see the difference? So not very, huge difference here, but this one OH group is on the opposite side of this group of the molecule, right? Now, if you go to the beta group, it's on the same side. That little tiny difference is actually really important in what you can do with the building blocks of these molecules, right? Chemistry is crazy, complicated, but if you think about it in the big sense, if you were to take the same glucose molecules and link them together, right? So all the OHs are on the same side, right? You can see this, okay? That makes starch. This is what we've talked about before, easily broken down for energy sources. You break these bonds, right? And then you can actually break sugar down even further, and that gives you energy, all right? Well, what if you alter the types of glucose you have? These are B glucose monomers, and if you alter these, see how the OHs now are on opposite sides of the chain, up and down and up and down? That forms a carbohydrate called cellulose. Cellulose is, well, I wouldn't say for everything, but almost nothing living can break cellulose down. There are a couple organisms that can do it that are microbial, so there are bacteria and some other things that can break down cellulose. Most animals can't, though. Okay, unless they process it for a really long time. So and what I'm saying here is that cellulose makes up wood, right? So what eats wood? Well, termites do, but they have microbes in their gut that actually helps them break it down, right? Uh, you know, uh, so you could actually should also say wood and other plant structures, right? So, grass, which isn't really wood, is made of largely cellulose. Cows have four stomachs and multiple different species of bacteria that they use to break it down, right? So this is really tough stuff. It fossilizes well over millions of years, right? It doesn't really break down very easily. So, I just want to kind of highlight the point here that just by how you put the molecules together or which molecules you put together into a polymer will really determine, how the properties, I guess you should say, of that molecule. So cellulose, as I just said before, you can have these opposite, sort of this opposite linkage here, um, make up plant cell walls. Okay, and I don't mean to be disgusting here, but talking about eating plants and everything. Um, so we just got past the growing season really in New Jersey, right? We're getting into the fall, the harvest is happening. Everybody's eating fresh vegetables, apples will be in bloom, all that stuff, or in season rather, and all that stuff. So, um, one of the best things in Jersey is eating corn, I think, New Jersey corn. Now, the corn kernel itself, I'll just draw a little picture up here. The corn kernel itself, as it sits on the cob, right? It's kind of like this little, sort of like circular shaped thing. It's got that little mark right there. The outside surface is cellulose. Okay, the inside is starch. Okay, so why do we eat corn on the cob? Well, you can't digest the cellulose on the outside, but once you break it open, your enzymes can get to the starch inside. So there are two different polymers here that are right next to each other. One's called cellulose, that's indigestible. You don't have the enzymes or anything that can break down cellulose, which is what we call dietary fiber, right? It goes basically right through you. The starch on the inside can be broken down because it is in that, alpha glucose chain instead of the beta glucose chain. Okay, so why do we eat corn? Why am I bringing up that example? And why would I say I didn't want to really be disgusting? Well, okay, so you eat 2 ears corn on the cob or whatever. That's not the last time you see it, if you know what I'm saying. So, right before you flush it away, you'll see it again. So, the reason that I bring that up is because starch is digestible. That's what the calories you get from corn. The cellulose seed coat, which is, what you see when you look at corn, is not digestible. So, it literally will go straight through your gut and it can't be broken down, right? It's actually really good for you though, because it does bring a lot of other stuff from your gut with it. Okay, so as I said before, there are some organisms that can break down cellulose. They make enzymes called cellulases, like bacteria and like, grazing animals like cows. Okay, so I don't really think I need to talk about this now because I just mentioned it before. Now, insect exoskeletons, right, coming from my sort of expertise here, are made of chitin. Chitin is another polysaccharide, another structural polysaccharide that provides support to insect exoskeletons as well as, weirdly enough, fungi cell walls, right? So a mushroom growing out of your lawn has the same structural, molecular structure to its body as insects do, which is really kind of weird. Chitin, because it's also very versatile and it's flexible, right, can be used as surgical thread. So if you've ever had surgery and had dissolvable stitches, right, uh, that's what they're using. So chitin can be broken down, even though it's structural. It's not like wood. Lots of things eat insects and stuff, and mushrooms actually, and they have no problem breaking them down. Okay, so this is going to end this little chunk right here, and we're going to get into lipids, fats in other words, in the next little presentation.